Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jonah Ralston on the Economic Development Commission. I'll be leading the meeting today since our fearless leader, Jim, is on the virtual option here. So we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And today's meeting is in relation to a proposal for the Capital Catalyst Revolving Loan Fund, and it is in relation to let me make sure I get the name right. The Little Rainbows, right? Play place. Yes, yes.
Start with a roll call.
So we'll first start with roll call.
Thank you. Commissioner John Donahue. Commissioner Jim Nelson.
Here.
Commissioner Mary Kay Paulson and Weston. Here. Commissioner Jonah Ralston.
Here.
Council Representative Johnson.
Here.
And we have excused absent Commissioner Mark McGlynn. Thank you.
Shauna ex officio, you do that? Or not?
And ex officio Shauna Wesley in the chamber. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. All right, so let's go ahead and start with a motion regarding the new business. Do we want to break these into separate ones, Rebecca, or how do we want to do this?
Just do 3A review.
Okay, so we'll start with 3A, which is a review and possible action relating to the minutes of the September 5th, 2023 Economic Development Commission meeting. So I would like to first entertain a motion for approving the minutes, and we'll discuss it then after we have the motion.
I move to approve the minutes.
Okay, and do we have a second? Thank you. Okay, any discussion? If you want to take a quick perusal of those, you can. If you notice anything, I'll allow just a few more seconds here. Okay, so if everything looks okay to everyone, we'll go ahead and vote for approval. Please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Hearing none, motion is approved. We will now move on to our second motion for 3B under new business.
If you don't mind, Chairperson Ralston, maybe we want Nina to introduce herself before we go into closed session and tell the commission a little bit about her project and her proposal. And then we can, the commission can ask a few questions if they have questions before we go into closed session and talk about the finance piece.
Yes, I will take that friendly suggestion. And so if you would like to come on up before we move into closed session, we'll allow, yes, our
Hi, I know I've spoken to some of you before, but my name is Nina Ayango Khans. If you recognize the Ayango, it's because my grandfather was an architect here in Fort Atkinson, and he did this room and this building and lots of other things. So I didn't grow up here, but I've lived here for the last 10 years. We actually live in their old house, and we love this community so much. There's so many things that have opened up to like me personally, my kids, things like that, since we moved here. So I don't know, we just really like it here. But my business is called Little Rainbows Play Place. I am not open yet, but my lease started in June. I'm in process of getting everything ready and put together. I'm hoping that I will be open like late September, early October. It is an indoor playground that focuses on more like large muscle movement, things that kids can't really do at home in the winter. So things like adaptive swings, things for them to climb on, stuff like that. So I don't want to focus on like just like having plex or like dress up things that they would have at home. So I'm trying to, we'll have some of that because there are kids who prefer that type of play. So just trying to find a good balance. But my oldest son is on the autism spectrum. And so it was really important for me to have a place that's really inclusive. So that's kind of one of the big goals is, inclusive play for everyone and really offering a very like inclusive, welcoming environment to all kids, all families, things like that, which is why we have things like the adaptive swings and stuff like that. And also being ADA compliance really important to me too. So like having wheelchair accessibility, and I'm looking at hopefully down the line having like a large changing table for kids who might still need to be changed when they're older and stuff like that. So yeah, but I also recognize that we live in a smaller community and you can't just focus on that. And I do want to have the environment be open to all kids, because we certainly have gone to other places that aren't quite as inclusive, aren't quite as friendly to kids with special needs. And I also see a lot of change just overall in terms of like kids' activities and things like that, just in general becoming more inclusive. So I kind of want to be one of those businesses at the forefront. So yeah, and then outside of kind of a normal weekly schedule, we'll have parties on the weekends. And all of our parties are private. So the families will get the entire place to themselves. And then I'm offering kind of like a la carte kind of style, like add-ons. So start with like a base price, and then families can kind of pick and choose what they want so that they're not like being pigeonholed into a certain package or a certain price bracket. They can kind of, make it how they want it. And I'm trying to think what else. Oh, one thing actually I forgot to mention the last time that I spoke to the loan committee was that I am planning on starting a program called Rainbow Connections, which is for families who couldn't afford to come very often. So it's kind of like a roundup kind of program, or if people want to donate, and then when it gets to a certain level, working with the school district to identify families that might have financial need, and then giving them a certain number of passes to come in for the year, or perhaps a membership, things like that. In terms of the loan, I asked for 50,000, and that is for covering my working capital. So I originally was going to use that to fund my play structure, and then realized that I needed that before I could, get to all of this. So I just, it's the same amount that I needed. It's just kind of in different baskets. So, yeah. Does anybody have any other questions? I think that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Thank you, Nina. So if anyone from the commission has questions, now would be the time.
Mr. Donahue, can you turn on I'm sorry, there's a button in the back. Yep, on, off. We should have turned that on for you. My apologies.
I just wanted to mention, thank you so much for taking the entrepreneurial initiative of doing this. It's a formidable risk, and you're to be commended
Thank you.
for taking that on.
Thank you. Yeah, my dad is a financial planner, and he has been for quite a long time. So he's been a really big source for me in terms of planning everything and knowing, the ins and outs and risk and things like that. So I'm really blessed to have him in my corner.
Do have some questions on the financials. Would that be in the closed session?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
thank you.
So anyone else with general questions not related to the specifics of the proposal right now, at least in terms of the financials?
Okay, thank you everyone
Thank you,
for your
Nina.
time. Do you need me to step out now?
We're going to
Okay, all right, all right, we'll do it. Thank you.
Okay, so now having heard from our applicant and with the proposal information in front of you, we're going to go ahead and now move to go into a closed session. So I would like someone to move into a closed session, please.
Also move.
Thank you. And someone who would second?
Second.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, and so we'll go ahead and take a vote then, unless there's any discussion. Okay, hearing none, we'll go ahead and take the vote then. Please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Hearing no dissent, we will have that approved and move into closed session pursuant to 1985 1F. Okay, motion is approved. Okay, so we are now back in open session. And At this point, we can entertain a motion. We can still have some discussion, but we can entertain the motion to approve this loan. So if someone would like to make that motion.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve the $50,000 operating loan subject to a second mortgage on their primary residence.
I second.
And just to be clear, that is at a 2% fixed interest rate for a 7-year term.
Okay, any discussion? And I appreciate that we added that condition. Yes, I think that's important. Okay, hearing no more discussion, then we'll go ahead and signify approval of the motion by stating aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. And the motion carries unanimously. And that's our more formal business for now. So we will now hear a presentation from the Wisconsin Economic Development Association. So Melissa Hunt, if you would like to come on up, thank you.
Good afternoon. Glad to be here. Is there a clicker? No problem. And I assume you need me to stay here to hear me, right? Okay. I'm pretty loud, but I will.
More for the people out there.
Yep, totally understand.
Nope, that's not that one. That's not that. I won't-
Don't touch that one.
Don't press any buttons.
And maybe just while we wait, I also brought our president and CEO of WIDA, Catherine Berger, with me, so she'll give you a quick update on what we've got going on at WIDA as well, and then we'll dive into it. So
Welcome. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
joining us.
there we go. Uh-oh, look at, I'm going too fast here. Is it click or?
You can, if you scroll backwards, I think it'll go backwards.
Oh, look at that. Awesome. That's what I did. I hit the scroller. Well, thank you very much for having us today. My name is Melissa Hunt. I am the chair of the board for the Wisconsin Economic Development Association, the WIDA. We prefer the other WIDA with an H, WHEDA, to not get confused. And we are the statewide economic development association. So that means if you're an economic developer in Wisconsin, you can become a member. We lobby on behalf of economic development in Wisconsin at both the mostly focused on the state level, but also sometimes at the national level. We're very engaged with the International Economic Development Council. And our focus here in Wisconsin, I'm going to hand it over to Catherine to really dive into and just give you some updates on, is really to be out there networking and providing opportunities. And so the reason we're here today is we did an update at Jefferson County Thrives Economic Development Group a few months back, or was that even last year, maybe? Oh my gosh, was it that long ago? And Rebecca said, hey, why don't you come and share some of the information you shared with us? So we're doing we usually do a 3-hour session. It's very abbreviated today. I'll get it done in about 15, 20 minutes. But we do have a handful of slides and information I'm just going to dive in on. But I'm quickly gonna, and I work for Ayers Associates. I do have a full-time job, but I'm super involved in a handful of organizations around Wisconsin, and WIDA is my favorite, and I'm excited to be chair of the board this year. But I'm going to kick it over to Catherine to just tell you a little bit more about what we've got going on at WIDA and what we do. I think
So-
you got to be here.
Sure. We are a 400 membership association. We are classified as a 501c6, and we have an affiliated 501c3 that is our nonprofit entity through which we are able to do charitable purposes. Our members consist of local economic developers, state. We have bankers and lawyers and large businesses in the state that are members, as well as developers, engineers, all types of people. Economic development is so broad that there are very, very many people who touch it, like you in your involvement in this committee. So we offer a number of we have a number of activities that we do. We have advocacy. So like Melissa mentioned, we lobby at the state capitol. We have a full-time lobbyist that is under contract not really full-time, but he is on WIDA issues a lot of the time. And we also offer academies, which are webinars that we host. And also we have a 2 in person and at least 6 webinars per year on economic development topics of interest, like housing and talent and workforce and real estate redevelopment. All kinds of different topics are presented for the edification of our members. Then we also have what's called the CRA network, which is a network of bankers who are regulated under the what's called the Community Redevelopment Act, CRA, Community Revitalization Act and Reinvestment Act. That's it. Thank you. And they and that those bankers get together and in various communities around the state and talk about how they can get CRA eligible projects done, projects like the one you approved the loan for today. So if you weren't doing that loan, if it were doable by a bank might step in, and that would be a CRA eligible activity that they could report to the federal government when they do their annual evaluation. And so those are the 3 main buckets of activity. We have 2 conferences per year, which are attended by about 300 to 400 people. And our next one is coming up in our Fall Best Practices Conference is coming up in Eau Claire at the very end of September. And we also have what's called the Community and Economic Development Awards at that conference. So we honor the best, uplift those best economic development projects from around the state and programs. So hopefully someday we will get a nomination from Fort Atkinson about what you've done that is worth telling the whole state about. We also have a TIF Housing Academy coming up in person in Eau Claire. And then we'll that's a whole full morning session and WIDA Academy sessions, like I said, throughout the year. Our Governor's Conference and Academy will be held in Milwaukee.
Should I switch that?
It's in Milwaukee this coming February. And we switch between Milwaukee and Madison locations every year on that conference. So that's WIDA. And I'll give it back to Melissa and she can tell you more about what we're going to talk about today.
Perfect. Thank you, Catherine. So we just wanted to share a bit about our association. You all have access to that through the municipality. Your city manager is a member, and we usually engage in many activities. Deb's a member. So our goal is really to provide those opportunities out there for organizations and individuals. We also teach a basic economic development course. And then Economic Development 101, like I'm kind of highlighting today for our local elected officials. I'm going to dive into the nitty gritty, and I'm a very fast speaker. I also really am a big nerd and love economic development. So I get super excited and then talk even faster. So I will apologize in advance. And if at any point you want me to repeat anything or slow down, just give a little wave. But we like to dive in and just share a little bit about the network because economic development really is in everything that we do. And so it is every entity in Wisconsin. We like to joke, but we're super well connected. And that's really the intent of what we like to do is if all of our gears and we're not all moving seamlessly and working together and partnering on what needs to happen, be it from education to workforce, it all impacts our businesses and our municipalities and things that are happening within our communities from an economic development perspective. So at the statewide level, one of our biggest partners is WEDC. And the WEDC is the team. I actually worked for WEDC for about 8 years before I joined the dark side and came to the private sector. I was actually a representative in Jefferson County and spent a handful of time here in Fort working on projects and talking about things. So familiar with the area. They're our partner that we continue to work with and can bring in as needed on certain programs, grants, and activities. Then we dive into what's kind of that next level is the regional economic development. MadRep is the regional economic development entity here. Then we continue to go smaller and you have Thrive and everything that Deb and team are doing. And then obviously we dive into that local level and this is you and your team. And so it really is, in that, joke, it takes a village, but it really is a team effort. And if we don't all work together and we're not seamless, and And frankly, if we don't all kind of stay in the right lane, or kind of swim in our, with the Olympic theme here, maybe swim in our lanes, you know, things can go haywire. So it's really important to kind of understand what your role is and what you should do as we work through the process. So one of our favorite things to do when we think about diving in and talking about economic development is how can we sort of judge you, for lack of a better term, but look at your community and say, hey, if I was coming here, maybe I'm going to be a new teacher and maybe I have a trailing spouse, or maybe I'm looking at a position at one of your businesses in your community, or maybe I'm just trying to find a cool place to live. What do I see? And the easiest way, and we found even from our site selectors, large and small businesses, everyone looks at the Google. And so they're online, they're doing searches, maybe they use Bing, but we love to do 2 or 3 Google searches over 2-week period before we go into community to just see what pops up. So what I will tell you, and I'll break it to you right away. Yours wasn't bad, which is good. It wasn't great. There wasn't a ton out there. Which is a good thing, right? I mean, if I click the news, there were like all we got for the last month were the obituaries. Really good thing because it didn't say you made terrible choices as a commission. It didn't say the council did anything bad. You'd be surprised at how often stuff like that does hit. The city website was the first website on Google, which is good because it means you're controlling the message. But then it also means you're controlling the message. So we kind of just dive into that, share with you a little bit so you kind of understand. There was a ton of cool stuff about the history and historic info. It hit up the Rock River. I will say there was some like a bunch of the Rock River flooding information popped up a few times. I was here back in 18 when it happened. I remember 08 and 04. You know, that stuff's not bad, but to me, more of it, there was some social media presence. It wasn't huge. Usually that's why I looked like 2 or 3 times over a 3-week period just to see if we were in one community once and some council member went off on what Twitter used to be or X now about a council decision. It was wild. And I was like, do you guys realize like this is the stuff that shows up on the website or when people Google you? So it wasn't bad. The fireside was the #1 attraction that was highlighted multiple times. And then when you pick up things to do, I just like to show kind of the information that came up. So it wasn't bad. It wasn't good. I just think it's interesting. So as you start to think about things you can do, you know, influencers are a big deal as long as they're good influencers. You know, they say, what do they say? All PR is good PR, but maybe that's not the case, but maybe you should be throwing more info, trying to, if there's something you could dive into, if I would say is there a group, could you maybe give a high school class a project this year to throw up some YouTube videos and talk about what's really cool here, or find different ways to just promote the community. There's probably some small, creative, fun, cheap and easy things you could do, frankly, to maximize that search engine optimization. So Fort Atkinson comes up more often and cool things pop up. Small things, create some hashtags on some of your social media, chat with the chamber, visitors bureau, other things, because that kind of stuff did not show up. Again, probably good when it's because you don't want the wild stuff to pop up. But even when I clicked on the news, again, not bad stuff, which is good, but not a ton. So diving into economic development and kind of why we do what we do. We use the international definition, which is accredited by the International Economic Development Council, to talk about economic development. Long and short of it is, you know, all of our jobs, especially when we speak at the municipal level, and this is geared for, you know, this presentation is geared for our local elected officials and commissioners like you all, is we need to have a stable tax base. And so if you kind of work backwards to what does that mean and how do we get there? Quality of life continues to be important. I mean, I think we all live, love, play, work, all that stuff. We want to be in the same place, has been over and over for years, but that's the truth of the matter is, assets within your communities are really important in ensuring that people want to be there, people have the opportunity to work there, and we can improve the economic well-being. But overall, we know expenses go up, so we need to ensure, in a perfect world, a growing tax base, but worst case scenario, it needs to be stable. As we dive into economic development over the last, I'd say 20 years, we've really had a shift that's gone from industrial development, business parks used to be all we talked about. We kind of used to joke it was that focus on business, focus on business. And we didn't think about the marketing aspect. We didn't tie in education. We didn't think about workforce. And so we've really modified what economic development is. We used to separate out community development. We still, I think, sometimes love to talk about there's planning and engineering. But as we start seeing changes, if we're not all working together, especially at the municipal level and all of our divisions and departments aren't intertwined, it's more and more common that our administrators, our city managers, even deputy staff are really involved and engaged in economic development because it has to be really aligned. And so we've modified what used to be these constraints tied to business development, and that was economic development, looked at the institutional social capacities that we had. We brought in education, marketing, brought it all in together to say we need to do all these things right, or at least as a team, and hopefully well, to have solid economic development. Oh, I'm going backwards. And then the biggest piece, like I said, I kind of talked about, you can't do one thing. I like to joke when as a planner, a big nerd, love designing like neighborhoods and subdivisions, but I was really good at saying, well, what does our zoning look like? And didn't always think, especially when I was young, well, can we plow the streets? Can the fire department get there? So I like to think of economic development as like a puzzle piece. So when we start thinking about all the things that we're doing and where we're packaging everything together, if we're missing one of those pieces and we're not all working seamlessly together, thinking about the marketing and our industries and our citizens and our students and our future workforce and existing workforce, and we're missing the puzzle, you just can't see the whole picture. And so we borrowed this from another community that does it really well, but think it's a perfect example is that economic development needs to be a community goal. Everyone needs to be focused on it. And you may have a million different objectives and activities that you're taking on in regards to economic development, but the hope and focus is on you're growing or keeping a stable tax base. A little bit into public policy, because I think, especially as a commission, it's important for you to just think about that. We hear over and over, and I love this picture because it's one of those things like, well, no one's really complaining about it or things aren't going on, so maybe we're not totally proactive or reactive. And then when we finally get to a place where we need to be reactive, well, we can't afford it. We can't afford change. We don't want to change. And so we don't ever want to end up into that cycle where we're not making great public policy decisions. And it's really important to think back from that first step to say, all right, what do we need to do here? What are our assets? Set our priorities and kind of work through that list. But the goal is, if you're sort of creating that one economic development goal, again, is that stable tax base and having the right ecosystem or the good environment. So quick, just making sure I didn't put you all to sleep so far. We love to ask everybody when we have this conversation about where do you think your community stacks up? And so our goal is to be in that top 25% in Wisconsin over the next 10 years as we think about where people are at. And I'd say we're pretty darn good at this already relative to the Midwest, Wisconsin, compared to many of our competitors or partners, neighboring states. But when you think about the community in general, on average, this is also the splits we see throughout the country. Is most communities are not engaged in what they're doing. Some of them are trying, but they're struggling. And then we continue to work our way up the cycle to progressive or advanced. And so I love to ask, how many people think you're already in that progressive to advanced stage? Hands up. Yep, good. And what we say is, if you're trying to get there, do you have solid goals, plans, actions? Is if you think you're in that progressive and you know where you're going, how do you get to that next level? And if you're in that advanced level, how do you get to a point where what you're doing is a best practice and many other municipalities around Wisconsin could replicate that? So thank you I think I saw hands on the camera too, so hopefully everyone's still with me. And then I just, again, planner by nature, but also in what we do is at some point you have to have something written down somewhere. In Wisconsin, we have comprehensive plans and many other things. But the one thing I say, and Rebecca, I'm going to pick on you, but as your city manager, it is not her job to manage everything, right? I mean, technically she's the city manager, it's her job. But when it comes to plans and economic development, and it's not Deb's job to send it over to Thrive to say, hey, thanks for all you do for us. Good luck. Keep going. It's really important for us to think about in all our different roles and activities that we're doing, that it's everyone's plan and how we all work together and process that. And I'll say every community is different. Most of those communities that are in that lower half and are struggling don't see that. Other communities that are even some of the advanced, maybe they start to tap out or have kind of plateaued a little bit, or like, well, we'll bring in someone new to do something. It still has to be a very big community goal, vision, action. You don't have to do a ton very often. Obviously you all are showing up here, but we like to just mention over and over that it really is, everyone needs to dive in and do their piece and their part to make sure economic development happens. So I won't belabor the point, but two of the biggest things that I wanted to just hit on that we've seen in the last 5 years, and maybe even 10 years that have been really big, are on the community development side and the real estate development side. What does that mean and how we can be better? And this is what we're continuing to hear across the nation on why people come here. And it could be small downtown developments. It could be residential housing. Or it could be larger scale business development. And we've had some big wins in the county recently, but I think the big things that we're continuing to hear and see over and over from our site selectors are at the municipal level. Do you have good processes? Do I know who I can call? Do they return my call? Is zoning easy to do if I want to make some changes? Right now in housing, that's probably the biggest thing we're seeing. I was in a community about a month and a half, 2 months ago, had the same conversation about 9 months ago. But one of the people were like, what are you talking about? We just changed our zoning in the 90s. And I kind of laughed and I was like, oh, yeah. 90s actually wasn't that long ago. Loved it. But realized like, yeah, we haven't changed our zoning till the 90s, and that was 30 years ago. About a year ago, someone said that in one of my communities, and my planner standing next to me was a young kid who was awesome, but he looked over and he goes, last time you changed your zoning, I wasn't born, and I'm your planner. And so we kind of laughed because I think we have to start thinking about smaller houses. Land is continuing to go up in cost, and we're not creating more of it. So we have to figure out how we maximize space and do things that really suit the needs of citizens and ensure people can stay. And I'll hit on that a bit more. The other thing is real estate development. In the state of Wisconsin, TIF is the one tool that we actually have aside from some of your, geo bonding and other things that we have to do at a municipal level. So if we want to come to the game, we got to have a ball to play. We really have to start thinking about how we can get creative and not be understanding what risks are important and what we can do to be involved and take calculated and smart opportunities and risks to grow. So big things that we've really heard that have really come up, I'd say over the last 10 years. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of opportunities outside of TIF in Wisconsin, but when it comes to those fast track approvals, you can see who's doing it well and who isn't when you're landing big projects and making things happen. And clearly it's happening around here. But that's one of the things that you can continue to work on and is a continuous process to improve regularly. The other thing I'd say that we probably over the last 2 to 3 years have really seen, and even right before COVID, but obviously into the COVID, is just what are staff being given to be supported, empowered? Do you trust them? And I'll hit on this a little later again, but there's lots of things they can't always tell you. Do you know what you want to see happen? And do they know what you want to see happen, and vice versa? Are there good ways that we're sharing this? And if we don't all, we all need to be successful and understand where we're at. That's why we tie it back to that planning a little bit and goals, just making sure we're all on the same page. It's really important as we move forward. That's probably the biggest thing, on the teamwork and being a good partner. We also have big dreams, big visions, and it has to be a strategy. We also have to have some money to do it, and that's not easy to always find it, but I like to hit on that because 9 times out of 10, our struggles are always come down to we don't have the resources to do it. Diving into confidentiality, I'm going to hit on next, but thinking about the media, like I said, you guys didn't have a ton. There are multiple times we've gone into a community and actually not too far around here, we've had communities that have denied projects at the 11th hour. We've seen things happen. I hate to pick on Horicon, but we had a huge project that got pulled that had multiple funding levels about 5 or 6 years ago in partnership with John Deere. That's an example I'd use where everyone thought it was going to go. There were multiple grants approved and then it never happened. We don't ever want to see that story in our community. And it happens a lot. And so we want to ensure that whatever we're funding and doing happens. The other thing, I was involved in Mercury Marine in Fond du Lac when we talked about some of the restructuring that was going to happen there, and some information leaked out of a closed session. And, we got some news out to the media sooner than it should have happened. And so it's really important to keep things that are in closed session. I'll hit on that a bit more on the next slide, but it's also making sure, even if you don't agree, once something is voted on or decided, it's one voice, and then you're not campaigning against it or for it. And most of you probably know this, but it gets tricky as we move forward. And I think it's just been really important. And we've seen a lot of mistakes in Wisconsin. We've seen a lot of things go really successful as well, but it's because we had a good process when we did it. And so just hitting through those things. I mean, we're all committed to, I think most of the time, confidentiality and obviously functioning in the best interest. But as long as your dog can't talk, share info with your dog, but don't share it with your spouse or your kids or other people if you're not supposed to. Those are kind of the tips that we talk about. And know that there's a lot of times when I've been in many, I've served at the municipal level most of my career prior to joining, and I've worked in Wisconsin at the town, the village, the city, the county, and the state level. There were a lot of times I couldn't share information I wish I could have. But no, it wasn't because I didn't want to. I talk a lot. It's because I couldn't. And so know our staff and your partners and your teammates and your city manager are sharing info when they can, because they should. Now I'm going to dive a little bit into what I think is the more cool, fun stuff, but we've really seen a lot of changes, especially post-COVID, focusing on the experience. I think the data that we're seeing on our next generations that are kind of coming and going are focused on the experience. And quite frankly, even some of our generations as they age are more not worried about things, but opportunities and places they can be post-COVID. Obviously, we've heard a lot about ensuring people have places, third spaces, places they can be social and interactive. And that's good for healthy well-being, mental health, et cetera. And so we're talking a lot more, even though it's been very important to a lot of people for a long time, about placemaking and thinking about what that means. One of my favorite, and I stole this because there's a very famous guy who has a theme called 8 to 80, but I say 7 to 17 to 70. So if I go somewhere and I bring my 7-year-old, my 17-year-old, and my 70-year-old, how can I keep any of them off their phone or their video games? And can they walk, travel, hang out, and enjoy the space? And so we need to think about that a lot more as we continue to develop our communities and what that means. We also should try things out and fail fast and move on and find ways to be interactive, engage. And for you all, I think kind of what we saw at the beginning, figure out ways to hit that social media. Let's get us a Fort Atkinson, the Fort influencer, and challenge some of our kids in the marketing classes or other places to talk about things that we've got going on as we're doing it, and creating some of those spaces and figuring out how we hashtag and post about it as we go. Then the next piece I'd say is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I know you all have dove into this a little bit. Rebecca's and I actually are on a committee together that have talked about this a lot in Wisconsin. And there's so many different things. And I kind of joke, coming in, I could wave the rainbow flag or talk about race or ethnicity or many of those other things. Yes, that stuff is all very important, not to minimize it, but we need to really think about all the other opportunities that we have in our communities. And the biggest thing that summarizes it all to me is, do you have spaces and places for people? Can they hang out? Can they work? But can they live? And the biggest thing that we've probably seen, what I like to talk about our heroes, and obviously this was big as we talked about our nurses and our medical staff throughout COVID, but going in, can someone work in your public works department? And can they be out there at 5 a.m. making sure your street is plowed? And can they afford to live in your community? If 2 teachers in your community get married, can they afford a house? Because we're seeing in many of our communities around Wisconsin, there isn't the housing available, or they can't afford what's out there. And that includes apartments and other things. And so we really need to think about that. Housing for our heroes is a big push WHEDA's taken on, as we've talked about TIF and other ways we can grow. We're tackling things one at a time. But when we think about that at diversity, equity, inclusion, I don't want to minimize all the other things that are important. We do need to be inclusive. We do need to make sure people feel like they can belong. But where we've really seen we haven't hit the mark is housing. So now think about what the next 10 to 20 years looks from a data standpoint. By 2035, we're going to have the largest population of people who are senior or over 55 and 60 years old in the state of our country ever. And so if in the last couple hundred years of being a nation, we can't figure out or haven't had this dilemma, we clearly now are going to have a senior housing dilemma. So what is senior housing dilemma? That I will say, does it mean, yes, we think of cool places like Florida or Arizona, or places who've built villages and tied to that. But what that really means to me is, can I get in and out of my house easy? So are we building houses with stairs? Are we doing zero access? Can we have smaller homes? Wisconsin and the Midwest, one of the bigger things we've seen are people love being in their communities. So I don't want to leave. I sure as heck don't want to have to go to a senior living facility too far away from where I maybe grew up or my friends still are. And so that's probably the biggest challenge that we need to think about a little bit as we phase into the next 15 to 20 years, is we're tackling the need for housing. We're tackling data was saying we didn't need huge lots. We didn't need big developments. Now, post-COVID, I think we haven't seen the way things were maybe going to phase down, that we should focus on smaller lots. I think now we really need to focus on a mix of housing. Is there that retirement housing? Is there kind of the balance of starter and retirement seems to be similar size housing? And maybe we don't need to be taking up as big a lots and other things that we've been talking about in the past. So biggest thing I'd say, if we had one challenge that I'd say we need to focus on, it's thinking about not only the current housing challenges, but what the next 20 years to looks like, and then ensuring we're creating those spaces and places for people to stay in our communities and be. Preparedness is another thing. I mean, we've had enough explosions and disasters, floods in our region in the last 10 years. But thinking about COVID, this is Mayville. So during COVID, they closed down a portion of the street and created a community space. This was one of their designs to maybe put in an ice skating rink. It was so popular in the winter, but trying to think about ways we can use our spaces when we don't necessarily have a ton of available space within our communities. So I won't hit on that a ton, but this is probably my favorite slide. And I think the most important piece out of everything we say is if I close my eyes and you describe your community to me, you're going to describe 99% of every community in Wisconsin. And you've got great schools, you've got great parks, I can fish, I can hang out and it's safe. And maybe there's a bar and a church and a few grocery stores or places I can go. So I really need you to think about as long-term you focus on what that is. What is your point of differentiation? We don't hear about that very often. We have some rail access in our business parks. That's huge as we continue to grow. I did have someone once say, well, you could deer hunt out my backyard. I'm like, okay, well, that is different here, but not necessarily something we want to highlight, but we need to think about trails, recreation. I mean, Wisconsin's beautiful. Most places are. How do you tell me what's different about why you should be here? I think you've seen that in the business park development you've seen that's attracted people. We'll continue to see that and continue to focus on what those are and find those hidden gems and experiences that you have and really highlight them. And the fireside, you know, for example, that came up in the Google searches. This is another one that I love to kind of hit on. I will tell you, my first job was in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. I probably got a call a week from residents and citizens and occasionally a letter from the jail about how soon were we going to get a Kohl's. And I would say, why is everyone so worked up about Kohl's? Nina had one, Fond du Lac, or Appleton had one, Fond du Lac had one. And then boy, let me tell you, when Nina got one, they were pissed that we didn't. And I'm like, you know, when you walk into a store, one, now they track our phones, but they used to ask you your zip code when you left and when you bought something. We also didn't need a Kohl's in Oshkosh, quite frankly. They still don't have one. And so I love to think about communities, say Bloomingdale's versus Bloomingdale's. I stole this. We have someone else that was penny mustard versus penny pinchers. Bloomingdale's, obviously most of you know that's a higher end retail store, but a nice fancy retail store. Bloomingdale's is a used furniture and sometimes new furniture store. Most communities, I hope, don't want either of these. That's not what most of us need. And frankly, that shouldn't be our priority. And so when I would go into my old commission meetings and someone say, did you call Kohl's? I literally did call Kohl's probably every other week. And finally the guy called me back and was like, Melissa, when I see your number, I don't answer. I know what you're going to ask me. We do our data and we don't want to be in your community because they can go 15 minutes south or 20 minutes north and they can be here. Why don't you focus on something you can have? So, you know, thinking about that, what does that mean here? We're better off investing. I'm super biased. I'm on the Wisconsin Downtown Action Council Board, Wisconsin Rural Partners Board. Develop the cool niche things you have in your downtowns. Think on what, if there's a need, let's fill it. But overall, right now, and with Amazon, we don't have as many needs as we ever used to have in our communities. And the way they're growing now, you can get just about anything delivered at your door. So focus on what's cool and you could do. Waupun, for the longest time, had one of the largest, I think it was Waupun, sewing stores, but they sold funky wool and stuff that you could buy and different yarns all around the world that shipped out of there because they found a niche and it was a really cool business until the woman decided to retire. But those are kind of the cool, neat things that we need to think about and encourage in our communities, really hit on that point of differentiation. And last, this is kind of just hitting on some of the other stuff before I dive into finance and money and hit on a few things. We continue to see over and over, you know, people don't always agree on everything that we do, but once something is approved in a community or disapproved, if something goes 3 to 4, that's the same as a 0 to 7 vote. If something's approved 4 to 3 and you're at the grocery store and you were one of those 3 that said no, but it went through, you have to say, hey, kind of joking that the tribe, you know, the tribe has spoken, however it was, it's been approved and we have to be positive and kind of roll with our consensus and make sure things happen. That's probably the biggest thing in the last 2 years, I'd say we've seen in our communities are people after things are voted on and they're not for it, going on to those wild websites and creating Facebook posts or sharing about it in Nextdoor. And it doesn't do anyone any good. And quite frankly, you know, when people start to see it or hear about it, it doesn't add any positive value to the community in general. With that, the things that we start to think about when we're growing and developing our communities is that a developer isn't always a major manufacturer. It isn't always someone who's going to come in and put 100 apartment unit. Someone who's maybe going to own some duplexes like Joe next door. Could be someone that I would consider a developer if they own 2 or 3 houses or a few downtown buildings, and we should give them just as much respect, if not more, if they're investing in our community regularly, as opposed to those big folks that sometimes come in and drop in larger projects. And I think we don't always remember that or at least talk about it. And There's lots of ways we can be better partners and encourage people to come to our communities, and it's recognizing that it's not just the big folks in town, it's also the small. Quickly hit on money, because we do have to think about that and talk about it, because it's important, because that's where we continue to struggle, is having adequate resources. Municipal funding falls on our shoulders in Wisconsin, is one of the only ways we can make things happen outside of TIF. And so we have to be really creative with similar to today, the revolving loan fund conversation y'all had, but thinking about grants and other opportunities to dive into resources to help others. And really to think about how, from the public standpoint, we can dive in. Just hitting on kind of the tactics and goals of why we move that direction, or what our benefits and focuses are. We really focus on maximizing the funds that we have locally and investing them locally, ensuring that we're stimulating new development and opportunities, and stick to some of those plans and goals that we've already created. There's a handful of reasons by statute that we have to do some of the things we do in Wisconsin, and these are them just highlighting a little bit about economic development is an easy way to say we're going to make things happen, but a handful of other areas that we do have to focus our financing and hit on those opportunities. Oh, here we go. Making the clicker go too fast. Capital improvement planning is really important. I always mention this, especially going into this time of year when you're going to hit budgeting. It's not just as simple as getting your budget, but thinking about the next 3 to 5 years and some of the big things you need to buy, and ensure you're planning for it in advance. Not all communities actually do that, so you'd be surprised to say like, oh, that kind of just makes sense. And it's actually not as common as you would think. And then just diving into really getting creative, maximizing your TIFs, doing those extensions, thinking about new ways you can dive into maximize the federal programs that are being launched. Sometimes taking advantage of some of those disasters to figure out ways that we can maximize additional funding that's available. I always like to just bring this slide up because this is one of my favorite things. I was in Fond du Lac County doing economic development at the municipal level, and someone came up and was like, I see that guy, I bought the book. And I'm like, man, if we had like $1 for every time someone said that, there are a ton of opportunities out there. Sure. Are they very targeted, and do you have to fit them in? Yes. So the truth is there a million grant dollars available in Wisconsin? Probably. Are they for what we need them for? Probably not. And so I always like to just bring that up. Here's a handful of the resources that we have. You have to have very specific opportunities to tap into some of these. And the biggest thing I think we've seen the change is, and there was a new report that DOA came out with talking about our comprehensive plans, and ensuring that as communities are starting to apply and ask for more things, we're thinking about, did they actually have a plan in place to do this? And they're not just shiny sparkly thing, ooh, or coming up with things to try to tap into a grant program. It's really focused on, do you have a plan? Do you have goals? Are you tapping into those things when you come to us? So again, I don't need to hit on kind of the toolbox, but we don't have a ton of opportunity aside from TIF and creating these creative funds. You all clearly know what revolving loan funds are because you've been in discussion about it earlier today. We really encourage communities to keep diving into that. And kind of to wrap up here, I think the biggest thing is, you can have 2 projects that are almost identical that are next to each other. I talk about downtown buildings and development, and you think they're the same, and they aren't. And so when we really think about every project, every business, every opportunity we have, every citizen and their needs, it really is different. And so we need to weigh out the checks and balances of everything that we do to ensure that, we're taking good risks, but we shouldn't be afraid of all of them. And we should really dive in to make sure we're creating opportunities to grow. Kind of just wrapping up is, some of the things we've heard is continue to grow your partnerships. You don't have to do it all alone. It really is a team effort. And if you have any questions, I'll kind of end with that, but I did go through fast. Thank you for having us today. And I'd happy to take anything if anyone has anything, otherwise
Great. Thank you, Melissa.
I will just mention a couple of things. Thank you very much. That was a wonderful presentation. Fast, but very informative, as always. So we appreciate you both coming down and making the time tonight, and then, coming to our meeting and then leaving for a half an hour and coming back. So we appreciate that. I will just mention just 2 quick, anecdotes. Well, one quick anecdote, and anyway, I think, Mason Becker is one of our city council members, aside from Bruce Johnson, who's on the Zoom. And I think there's always been this thought that, why doesn't Fort Atkinson have a Target? So I'm very pleased with your explanation there. So I think that's helpful.
don't need a target.
Target, exactly. And then the other thing I'll just mention is that we do have a pretty significant plan upcoming over the next like 2 to 5 years with our tax increment districts. And I would encourage everybody here to attend our council workshop on the 20th at 6 p.m., where we will be talking with our financial advisors and really laying out a plan for the next couple of years for our tax increment districts, which includes closing 3, potentially creating a fund for affordable housing, and then opening 2 additional. So that's over the next few years, but the plan is really coming into focus. And I'm really excited about it. We just had our joint review board last week, and I got really excited about it. And Jonah was there. He saw me get a little giddy. So I would just encourage people from this commission to come to that meeting if they're available. And I know, Deb, we had something on the agenda for you to kind of bring it locally. So if there's things to add, I'm sorry, Jonah, if I'm taking over it all, but just
Your city manager, it's okay.
anything to bring it home locally for us, Deb, would be appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who aren't aware, the county updated their strategic plan last year. And 2 of the 4 strategic goals that they have fall within our office. So housing and intentional economic growth. And as part of that, what we're doing is we are going through the county and taking an inventory of areas that we're looking to grow. And then we're going to go through and put together a site through our GIS system where we can go through and say, okay, this is an area that's potentially good for growth. And then also, are the people who own that property interested in long-term growth on their land? So that's one of the efforts that we're going through. Another, we are working with 2 different organizations. One is a group that does lobbying. And so we're working with them to help them to advocate for additional utility capacity here within the county. As we look at We Energies, they have historically been making a lot of investments over on the east side of the state, and we recognize that it's a huge investment for them. We also recognize that that's one of the primary reasons that Jefferson got that investment, is because we had the utility capacity available to support those large projects. And so we're working with them. We're also working with another group to go through and help to do some positive PR, I guess you could say, within the county. And so the county as a whole is working with that group. And so I'm not leading that discussion, but we are trying to do what we can to help give you all talking points as it comes up in the community. Why is this happening here and not here? And I should also mention, you do have some really great things that are happening here within the city of Fort Atkinson. Some good housing developments that we're working through right now. And, there's other projects that are hopefully in the near future.
Excellent. Thank you, Deb. Any questions for either of our presenters, or are we about ready to close? Thanks, sir. Just want to say a last quick note. After having been on the joint review board and now this, I'm feeling very comfortable with the city is taking things. Right? We're leveraging our TIF districts very well, pursuing housing, which is incredibly important, right, for growing our community, and also innovative loan funds like these, right, where we can bring in some businesses and development. So things are moving in a positive direction for Atkinson, right? It's good that we're all part of it.
If you don't mind, I'm
yes.
sorry, you just mentioned loan funds, and I would be amiss if I didn't mention that our Live Local Development Fund, we now have $9.5 million available, as the Fort Hospital just invested $3 million into the fund, and the Fort Foundation another $1 million. So thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Well, I suppose I can make the motion to adjourn. I will go ahead and make that motion if there's a second.
Second.
Okay. And so if everyone would signify approval of that motion by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. The motion carries. We are done. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.